Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the thrilling and honestly highly unpredictable world of ultra-young football debutants. We're going to dig into the numbers, the history, and the absolute roller coaster stories of players who stepped onto the world's biggest stages before they were even old enough to drive a car. It's a fascinating phenomenon that I like to call the Prodigy paradox.
So I gotta ask you something to kick things off, and I apologize in advance for the sudden wave of existential dread. You know that terrifying moment when you're watching sports and you realize the rookies are actually younger than you are? Well, in modern football, we aren't just talking about 18 or 19-year-olds anymore. We are talking about literal school kids.
Just to put this into perspective and show you exactly how young today's prodigies are, think back to the year 2008. Where were you? Whatever you were doing, Francesco Camarda was literally just being born. And today, he's already playing top-flight Italian football and setting records in both Serie A and the Champions League.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer today. 1. The teenage debut phenomenon. 2. Rewriting league records. 3. Conquering the global stage. 4. Where are they now? And 5. The reality of potential.
All right, Section 1, the teenage debut phenomenon. Let's see how putting these kids in the biggest pictures actually happens, because it's definitely becoming a huge trend across Europe.
Now, we throw the word prodigy around a lot in sports media, right? But to truly get what a prodigy is in this specific context, we're talking about rare, once-in-a-generation talent. We're talking about kids whose academy stats are so ridiculously dominant that managers feel they have absolutely no choice but to call them up to the senior squad, completely ignoring their biological age. Take a look at Camarda's meteoric rise. He starts at the Efferese Youth School, joins the AC Milan Academy, and then goes on to score a mind-blowing 485 goals in just 89 matches. Let me do the math for you real quick. That is an average of nearly 5.5 goals every single game. It's so crazy that during an injury crisis, AC Milan actually had to get special permission from the Italian Football Federation just to let him play. That led to his historic Serie A debut at exactly 15 years and 260 days old. No pressure, right?
But hey, it isn't always just about overwhelming academy stats. Listen to what Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta said about debuting 15-year-old Ethan Nwaneri. He simply said, "It was a pure gut feeling." I love this because it perfectly highlights that sometimes throwing a teenager into the absolute blender of the Premier League isn't about the data on a spreadsheet. It's about pure human instinct and just recognizing a special spark.
Moving into Section 2, rewriting league records. Let's look at the actual numbers behind these shattered domestic milestones.
Notice Ethan Nwaneri right there at the top of the Premier League debutants list. He didn't just edge past the previous record. He absolutely obliterated it. The old record holder was Liverpool's Harvey Elliott at 16 years and 30 days. Nwaneri stepped onto the pitch against Brentford at 15 years and 181 days old. That made him the first ever 15-year-old to play in English top-flight history.
And over in Spain, it's a similar youth movement, but with a seriously wild historical twist. Luca Romero, playing for Mallorca against Real Madrid, took the top spot at 15.6 years of age. But the crazy part, he eclipsed a record held by a player named Sanson, a record that had remarkably stood for over 80 years since 1939. And of course, hovering right behind them is Barcelona's Lamine Yamal at 15.8 years.
Now, the hype for Lamine Yamal isn't just standard media chatter. It comes right from the very top. His former manager, the legendary Xavi, publicly stated that Yamal is a player that can define an era at this club. That is an almost unfathomable level of expectation to drop onto the shoulders of a teenager who is, quite literally, still required to attend high school. All right, Section 3, conquering the global stage. Let's step out of the domestic leagues and see how these kids do internationally. If we trace the Champions League's youngest players over time, Celestine Babayaro held the top spot for an incredible 26 years after debuting in 1994 at 16 years and 86 days. A few players like Alen Halilovic came super close around 2012. But then, in 2020, Borussia Dortmund's Youssoufa Moukoko finally broke that decades-old record, taking the pitch at just 16 years and 18 days old. But here's where it gets really interesting. While modern players completely dominate the club records we just talked about, the World Cup reveals a totally different reality. The youngest players here are deeply rooted in history. Northern Ireland's Norman Whiteside set the record way back in 1982 at 17 years and 41 days. And rounding out the top three is the ultimate prodigy himself, Pelé, who completely captivated the globe in 1958 at 17 years and 234 days old.
Breaking down these top 10 youngest World Cup players by region reveals something amazing: the absolute dominance of CAF, the African Football Confederation. They hold 5 out of the top 10 spots, including legends like Cameroon's Samuel Eto'o. It really goes to show that the African continent has historically been the biggest stage for trusting and platforming youth at the absolute highest level of international play.
Which brings us to Section 4. Where are they now? This is where we need to take a step back and do a serious reality check.
Because debuting young is one thing, right? But staying at the top is a whole different beast. Look at these two. Both debuted in the Premier League at 16 years old, but their paths went in totally different directions. On the left, Wayne Rooney, who went on to become Manchester United's all-time top scorer and win 5 Premier League titles. On the right, Sheffield Wednesday's Mark Platz. After making his debut at 16, he made just one more appearance before quietly retiring from professional football in 2001.
We see a similarly stark contrast right here. James Milner debuted at 16 for Leeds United and built this incredibly durable, legendary career with over 500 appearances, multiple titles, and 61 England caps. But then you have former record holder Matthew Briggs. He debuted for Fulham at 16, really struggled to find his footing in the top tier, faced multiple setbacks, and eventually dropped down to play non-league football. Early exposure absolutely does not guarantee long-term elite survival.
Finally, Section 5, the reality of potential. Let's look at what lessons we can truly take away from all this data.
When we strip away all the media hype and the fan excitement, what's the actual cost of being a wonder kid? Well, the truth is, behind the glamorous records are massive, often unseen hurdles. We've seen it time and time again in the data. Players like Everton's James Vaughan, who debuted at 16, had his career severely hampered by recurring injuries because, let's face it, putting a developing teenage body into a physically grueling adult league takes a massive toll. We've also seen how that immense public pressure can lead to severe mental health battles like the ones bravely faced by Aaron Lennon.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. We all love witnessing history, for sure. We love the narrative of the Wonder Kid. But when you really look at the stats and you understand the historical outcomes, when you see a 15-year-old step onto the pitch this weekend, are you watching the birth of a legend, or are you just watching a childhood being rushed to the finish line? Thank you so much for exploring the Prodigy paradox with me.